Millions affected by terror attacks across the world. The Ghomeshi verdict terrorizes millions of Canadian women, and terrible Netflix movies on US Netflix are no longer available to Canadians using a VPN. It's time for another podcast. Not quite live from Forget the Box Studios in Montreal. This is the FTB Podcast, the only podcast you're listening to right now. It's time for another podcast. Let's meet our panel.
Hi, I'm Samantha Gold. I'm Forget the Box's legal columnist.
Hi, I'm Jian Ertekin, and I'm a once and future and former and all kinds of different editors for Forget the Box, and I'm also a student journalist from McGill Daily.
Hi, I'm Gabriel. I'm sometimes contributor to Forget the Box.
And I'm your host, Jason C. McLean. I love cats and I love nice weather. And we are Sunday, the 27th of March, Easter Sunday in Montreal. It's been a beautiful day. Amazing weather. I've been loving it. Perfect weather not to stay at home and watch Netflix. And we're going to be talking about what you can no longer watch on Netflix, period, regardless of the weather in a little bit. We're also going to be talking about where things aren't so nice, all the terror attacks that have been happening around the world. But recently, actually last week in Canada, this happened.
March 24, a decision was made on the Ghomeshi case that Jian Ghomeshi was not found guilty of sexual assault and choking charges.
I just wanted to be clear that, obviously we're considering the judgment. We're in the appeal period. So, yeah.
The case began back in October when CBC confirmed that the popular radio show host was taking time away to deal with personal issues. The personal issues were, in fact, the preceding dealings involving with accusations of sexual assault, where 8 women came forward to the Toronto Star attesting to Ghomeshi's use of violence and sexual harassment.
I don't regret doing it. It's been difficult. It's been hard. It's consumed me.
The decision made this Thursday left many sexual assault survivors enraged by the courts dealing with the case.
This, I feel like, was phase 1 of a conversation, and this is something that I feel like it's not going to end here.
Ghomeshi was acquitted based on inconsistencies from the compliance. However, many are arguing the complexities of sexual assault, such as trauma, are not being brought to the forefront of this case.
I think it's going to affect different survivors of sexual assault differently. I think it may make some women more determined than ever, and absolutely I agree with you. I think for some women it will make it more difficult for them to go to the police.
So Jian Ghomeshi acquitted of all charges in this case. There's another case coming up in June, but this really isn't good news for the accusers, obviously, but also a lot of Canadian women. Sam, what was your reaction when you heard the verdict?
I think he's still guilty. I have a pretty good grasp of how the legal system works, and the fact of the matter is that an acquittal doesn't equal innocence. In any criminal trial in Canada, the burden of proof rests entirely on the prosecution, and they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a person is guilty. All the defense has to do is raise a single doubt that the person is actually guilty. And if the jury has that doubt, they have to acquit.
Yeah, that's and I guess, well, in this case, it wasn't the jury, it was a judge who decided. And what I found interesting is the judge, he actually pretty much said that he thought Jian was probably guilty, but because of the case, he had to acquit. But he also made a really horrible comment. He basically said that we don't want to it's dangerous to set a precedent of accused means guilty.
The thing is, I believe numbers don't lie. If it had been 1 or 2 women, I would have given Ghomeshi the benefit of the doubt. But the fact that it was something like a dozen women who were complaining that he went too far, that he assaulted them, that he beat them, that he did things that were entirely inappropriate, that they never consented to, is what suggests to me that he's guilty.
I mean, the thing is, his big defense, and I'll say this, his big defense was that, he was consensual, his BDSM, and believe me, the BDSM community is very upset about this. They want to make it clear that their whole community involves consent, and sometimes there's written contracts, safe words, and there was none of that with Ghomeshi. But consent is a very interesting thing, and one of the things that the defense used to raise doubt is the fact that these women communicated with him after the fact.
Well, the problem with that is that it neglects the fact that girls are educated. The way that girls are educated about sex and appropriate behavior is to make nice no matter what. It's also extremely problematic because it ignores a fact that one of the ways that abuse victims protect themselves is by trying to put the most positive interpretation on the situation. You see this a lot with survivors of childhood sexual abuse. You see that you see that quite a bit in rape cases, that they'll question, maybe they interpreted things the wrong way, maybe they overreacted. They're socialized to question their own sanity, and that is extremely problematic.
I kind of see a relation here to what's going on with like Bill Cosby trial. It seems like women need to get like the women that were victimized need to get confirmation that there was like another victim, and then they feel like then they can kind of come out, and there's like that pausing, and that's the pause that's allowing people to like basically Ghomeshi to get away with this. It's sort of like the pausing of not coming out right away, sort of.
Absolutely. And I think one of the problems is that Canadians still don't seem to be entirely clear on what consent is. So I'm just going to reiterate what consent is as per our laws. Consent is the voluntary agreement of the complainant to engage in the sexual activity in question. There's no consent if someone other than the victim gave consent. So for example, if you said her father gave me permission, that's not consent. The woman never consented. There's no consent if the person's incapable of consenting. That means that if the person's too drunk or unconscious or too young to legally give consent, they are not consenting to sexual activity. There's no consent if you abuse a position of trust, power, authority in order to get sexual favors. So for example, if you're a woman's boss and you say, fuck me or you're fired, and she really needs that job and she has sex with you, that's still considered a sexual assault because she never consented. There's no consent if the person having consented to sexual activity expresses by words or conduct a lack of agreement to continue. That means that let's say the person consented to have sex. If in the middle of sex the person does something inappropriate, such as punching them in the face or choking them, things that they would never have consented to, and they express reluctance and discomfort, they have the right to stop at any time. And a person who willfully continues, despite these protests, is committing a sexual assault.
Yeah, well, it's clear. Like, honestly, like, I don't think anyone, even people who are defending the verdict and people saying, well, it's the law, the innocent until proven guilty, they're all still saying that they think Jian did it, that Ghomeshi did it. And I guess an interesting little sidebar here is one thing people have been saying is, oh, well, at least his career is ruined, right? As if that's really any solace. But I don't even think his career is ruined. He's never going to work at CBC again, but if he gets off in the next verdict, if he's acquitted the next time in June, he could easily start, well, a podcast, maybe not a podcast like this one, but a podcast and write a book or something and sue CBC for millions and still have a career.
Certainly. MRAs would jump all over his podcast. And a lot of people have been saying that, the verdict, guilty or innocent, is not going to ruin his career. There's an expression that there's no such thing as bad publicity. So yes, the trial was shedding a lot of negative light on Ghomeshi, but at the same time, it was giving him all this attention that he hadn't had previously. So a lot of people who, a lot of people who think he's innocent are going to buy into him, are going to keep listening to him, are going to keep watching him, regardless of whatever the verdicts are. It'll be different people, though. I'm sure the people who listened to him on CBC and were fans of him probably aren't the type that would like what he has been revealed to be. I mean, honestly, I never listened to Q, but I'll admit one thing. I was a fan of Moxie Fruvis when I was younger. That was his band. And that was for me, like, at least artistically and culturally, the saddest thing was the fact that I can no longer listen to Moxie Fruvis without realizing that a sexual assaulter was one of the members of the band. But, like, I mean, he was part of the culture for a while, but he's no longer, I guess, Canadian culture or local culture, CBC culture maybe has turned on him, but there are other people. He'll find new fans, which is really sad. And
I mean, that Roosh guy has fans.
Right? He has fans. Yeah, Roosh V has fans, and like a bunch of they're
who are these people?
They're idiots. And they like to threaten. They like to sue. They like to. I've heard stories about that. Even their local supporters are like that too, which apparently there are a few of them.
Yeah. Do you find there's a disconnect between kind of like the justice system and what's right? Like, it seemed like the verdict was right, but it wasn't right. Like, it was right because the case kind of fell apart, or the Crown didn't really protect, basically didn't double check the witnesses on anything.
I think the justice system does its best in the lousy circumstances it's in, because it tries to be objective, but a lot of the times when Parliament tries to enact laws to protect women, they get struck down on legal technicalities. If you take a look at Rape Shield, Rape Shield was a rule that was set out by the courts that said that you couldn't question a woman, you couldn't interrogate a woman on her sexual history when she was testifying in a rape case. And that was struck down as being unfair to somebody who was on trial for sexual assault on legal grounds.
Is it better in Canada than in the States?
Well, certainly. In the States, you have a lot of cases. I mean, the problem with the States is that criminal laws often vary from state to state, and especially in small towns where they have a vested interest in the men who committed the crimes, you'll often have them protecting them. There was a very famous case a few years ago of a couple of football stars from a small town who had raped a couple of women, and the town actually protected them and covered up the rape. And it took the intervention of authorities outside the town to finally bring these men to justice.
That's what I find really annoying. Like, a lot of people are saying, to protect the aggressors in this case, or like maybe like setting a bad precedent, saying, oh, what if like the law changes in such a way that just like women just show up and accusing men left and right. But like, do we realize the kind of public scrutiny these women are being put under just because they like? It's not a thing that you do lightly. It's like a big decision, and you're demonized by literally everyone outside.
Absolutely, there is a common belief that, and it's a very false one, that rape is overreported and that most rape claims are false. It's actually the opposite. Rape is underreported because a lot of women are questioning their sanity. They're wondering, did it really happen? Is it assault? Am I overinterpreting things? Am I being too sensitive? Or, oh, he's a good man, he just gets out of control every once in a while. Rape, and because of that, rape is underreported. Also, these women, when they come forward, if it's somebody close to them, if it's a relative who assaulted them, for example, if it's a position of authority in a small town, they have a risk of their sexual history being dragged through the mud. They risk alienating their families. They risk alienating their friends. They risk getting run out of town in small town situations. Their names are dragged through the mud. And that isn't necessarily fixed by a guilty verdict.
At least in this case, at least one maybe solace is that I think Ghomeshi will probably have a lot more difficulty bringing women back to his place now and not knowing what he's about, because they will definitely know what he's about because his face is everywhere.
Absolutely. Another problem with the whole consent issue is that a lot of people don't seem to bring in common sense. Common sense being that there are some obvious signs that a person is not consenting to the sexual activity. If the person's crying, screaming, saying stop, no, or in an S&M relationship, the safe word, clearly not enjoying or even pretending to enjoy, there are visible signs of pain, facial expression, bleeding, or if you take the average vanilla girl who is not into S&M or anything like that, or even in cases where she is but wouldn't necessarily consent to this, if the average person would not... If the average person would consider the act violent, unhealthy, dangerous, or only common in porn, and I'll give you a few examples: cum shots to the eyes, choking, punching, hair pulling, burning, scarring, cutting, scat, water sports, throat fucking even though the person's vomiting. If these are things that the average person is not consenting to, use your common sense.
Yeah, use your common sense unless it was priorly arranged. But I mean, is this like? Do you think the next verdict has a chance? Do you think he's gonna be found guilty the next time? Or?
I'll be honest. I have not looked at the next case in detail. I have not looked at the complainant, but or the complainant's story. I would hope that it does have a chance. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to her credibility and whether or not Ghomeshi's lawyer, and I got to say, he does get a pat on the back for choosing a female attorney in this case.
Who's actually very good.
Who's actually very good, because it would be like somebody being accused of hate crimes, choosing a Jewish or a black lawyer and having the Jewish lawyer wear a kippah to the trial, just to reinforce the point. To make him look like he's not a sexist, to make in Ghomeshi's case make him not look like a sexist jerk.
But I personally believe like that's as like reasonable, as logical and justifiable as you're calling someone out as being racist, and that person saying, "Hey, I'm not racist. Some of my best friends are black," or like I have some. So
absolutely,
I personally don't buy it that much.
Yes, but unfortunately, if you think about how stupid the average person is, and remember that half of them are stupider than that, and a lot of them end up on juries.
But also, too, keep in mind that it's not just him saying, look, I have some female friends. He has a quote-unquote female friend going out and viciously attacking these women and defending him with very intelligent remarks. And she's doing it for her career and her money. And obviously she's a very good lawyer, although... I mean, I wonder about the ethicality of defense attorneys sometimes when I hear people like that.
Yes, but at the end of the day, you have to remember that they're just doing their job.
They're doing their job, yeah, exactly. But she could have refused to take the case.
Absolutely.
I understand that these women were under distress and they made mistakes. and the Crown just did not see these mistakes coming for some reason.
That's
what I found kind of weird in the case. I mean, like the whole thing with Lucy DeCruz sending that email again.
Did they make mistakes, or did the Crown just basically not prepare for it?
I don't think they prepared.
What it's going to come down to is credibility. Is the complainant going to be considered credible by the courts? Is the jury going to believe her? Because what Ghomeshi's lawyer is most likely to do is exactly what she did in the first trial, which is bring up any of her behavior after it to try to shift the blame back onto the victim.
And that's the thing, that measurement of credibility is not an objective thing. We're all socialized, and like when people say rape culture is real, rape culture is real. Like remember, like last fall, I think there was this thing about like a lot of sexual assault cases happening in the taxis, and Montreal police saying to women that they should not go in taxis. Essentially,
alone, that was the thing. You're like,
people are just
no, you shouldn't. Taxis should be trusted. Taxi drivers should be scrutinized. Like,
absolutely,
there's a lot of victim blaming happening, and there's like undue responsibility put on the victim to just like prove themselves to be credible people. When it's like any other crime. This is not the case.
I will say that in rape cases, the main defenses somebody accused of rape can use is number one, they had a reasonable belief in consent. Number two, they didn't do it, which is the most obvious one. And last is that they had an honest but mistaken belief that the person was that for some reason by their body language, they thought that the person really wanted it, when actually that was the body language saying that they didn't, for example.
In the case of Ghomeshi, his honest but mistaken belief must be the fact that, but I'm a celebrity, so they obviously want it and I can get away with it if I want. That was, I think, his honest belief, if anything. But,
and I think that the Crown has an opportunity to make an example of him. Now, this is not necessarily to say that, all celebrities don't deserve a fair trial. They absolutely do. But if a judge who is supposed to be objective even says when issuing the verdict that you're probably guilty, this would be a beautiful opportunity for the Crown to bust its butt and make an example and say that even celebrities are held accountable for their actions, no matter how horrific.
Yeah, I mean, holding people accountable. At this point, Ghomeshi has not been held accountable. Little kind of morbid segue here. A lot of people who blow themselves up to commit terror, and sometimes people who have nothing to do with it, do end up being held accountable by societal judgment. In case you were wondering what we're talking about, this happened this week.
March 22nd marked Belgium's deadliest attacks of terror in the country's history. 3 coordinated nail bombings occurred in Brussels that morning, resulting in 31 victims and 3 suicide bombers killed. Over 300 people were injured.
My chest still feels the vibrations of that first bomb, and my ears still ring from all the screams and the bomb itself. And after the second one went off, it was dead silence in the entire airport. There was nothing.
Brussels was not the only victim of terrorism that week. Sunday, the eastern Pakistan city of Lahore faced its own. More than 341 people were injured and 69 people killed in a local suicide blast.
So the world's been rocked by a lot of terrorism over the past little while, as it always is. I've actually written a post on, which should have already been up on Forget the Box by the time this comes out, basically saying if you want to profile people, profile assholes, who are essentially the people who carry it out, and also the people who try to scapegoat an entire group for it. But some of this terrorism hits close to home. The terrorism in Brussels, not to me personally, but my mom works there. Every year her work sends her there, and she passes through that airport. Sometimes she takes the subway and stuff like that. And Jem, in Istanbul, you're originally from Turkey, right?
I am originally from Turkey, and I'm from Istanbul. And I'm from Istanbul, and I do have family in Ankara. And while no one from my family was personally affected by any of these, it's kind of like a shock to see, because the explosion in Ankara and the explosion in Istanbul, they happened like a week apart. There wasn't enough time given to us to fully just digest what happened in Ankara when the explosion in Istanbul happened. And I was up at 3 a.m. in the morning, and I saw this happening, and I'm just very frightened by this. And I called my parents, and they were okay, everyone's fine. What makes it really real is that the attack in Istanbul happened in a street where I used to spend a lot of my time when I was in high school.
Oh.
So, like, I could have been there if I hadn't come to Canada for university.
Yeah, well, I guess a related story to that is a number of years ago in Montreal, there was it was considered a school shooting or whatever, but there was an attack at Dawson College, and 3 people were killed. The police neutralized that one. That was a school I went to. Like, I could have been there too, and it kind of brings up the idea of like what actually is terrorism. Like, yeah, I mean, you have some thoughts about that, Sam?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the problem with a lot of discussions about terrorism is that there's a very racial view of it. A lot of people think, especially in North America and Western Europe, that it's a Muslim Islamic problem, that it only affects people in the Middle East or people from the Middle East and from East Asia, India, Pakistan, that sort of thing. When the fact is that terrorism, unfortunately, is something that's universal. The Unabomber, for example, that was a terrorist attack. The Unabomber was American. The KKK
and white too.
Yeah,
put that in there.
And yeah, he was white. The KKK, I think we can agree, is an all-white group, and it's a terrorist group, and it's American. The FLQ, the Front de la Libération du Québec, they're a terrorist group. They're white. They are North American. If you look at the Norwegian terrorist attack in the past year, their fellow Breivik.
A few years ago.
A few years ago. I think we can agree Scandinavians are the whitest people in the world.
Yeah.
And he was a terrorist.
Right.
There is this need to dispel the myth that terrorism is strictly a problem that originates with people of color. And I think that that's a huge problem. When you hear about terrorist attacks committed by white people, they're often treated as kind of isolated incidents. They're treated as flukes, or, the KKK, they're just a fringe group that don't do any harm. Well, you know what? Tell that to all the African Americans who've been lynched, who've been terrorized, the people who found burning crosses on their lawns. The fact is that these terrorist groups exist, and they're not people of color. They're white.
The flip side of that is people get labeled as terrorists when they actually are what I would call lone wolves. For example, the attack in Ottawa, which actually prompted Bill C-51 terror laws. The guy who carried that out, he killed 2 people. Well, actually, he killed 1 person, and then he was killed himself. Right. Just like a school shooting, like the Dawson shooting, like something like that. He was not a member of ISIS or Daesh or whatever. He claimed allegiance to them, but he was as much a member of them as Kimveer Gill, the guy who shot up Dawson, was the angel of death. But because he was Muslim and he claimed allegiance to ISIL or ISIS, everyone called that a terrorist attack. And I think that, if anything, would be a lone wolf attack versus, for example, what the KKK does, or like shooting thousands of,
But generally, isn't like a terrorist attack just politically motivated? And if it's sort of politically motivated, it's considered.
I think there has to be some. I think there actually has to be maybe some cohesion, some organizing for it to be a terrorist attack. Like there has to be at least more than one person involved in it, and they have to be coordinating in some way for it to be considered.
Okay, for instance, the lone wolf. I agree, it was a completely lone wolf attack in
Ottawa.
On Ottawa, but this can happen with the far right. Like there was that guy who went on a shooting spree in New Brunswick. Was it New Brunswick or something? And he killed a bunch of RCMP officers.
He killed two.
Like that could be considered a terrorist attack too, if it was politically motivated. Meaning he was listening to. I don't want to throw him under the thing. Let's say he was listening to Prison Planet.
Yeah, I agree with that. Because
and then all of a sudden he went on a shooting rampage. Yeah, that's a terrorist attack.
Okay.
Because the way that a lot of these terror organizations work is that it's not always the case that there's like a chain of command that's happening. One of my professors was telling us about how the Daesh and and ISIS was actually just functioning more along the lines of being a brand. So you do not need because they don't have an application process. You don't send your CV to become like a member of ISIS or something like that, right?
You kill enough people, they include you anyways?
Or basically, you can just,
a martyr?
You
Is
can
it
just
a franchise
say that,
operation?
Well, you can just say that you're acting on behalf of them, and that's about it. And also, basically, it kind of defeats the point of saying, if someone is saying that they did something for ISIS, there's no, it doesn't make sense for you to say, no, you didn't do it for ISIS.
Well, I was just more taking it from the example of the fact they passed this sweeping anti-terror legislation, which was not needed.
For instance, that makes sense.
That,
but for instance, the shooting in Florida, I think, at the Planned Parenthood clinic, for instance, that was politically motivated. Yeah. I don't think there's a large, huge organization against Planned Parenthood happening. But I would argue,
there's the
not
Republican Party, but that's beside the point.
Not to the same extent as, let's say, other terror organizations.
I'm agreeing more with Jem. I think they don't call enough things terrorist attacks. That's
an interesting point too. Yeah, that's actually.
It's like, you go into a clinic, abortion clinic, and then murder a bunch of like hospital workers. It's politically motivated.
Absolutely, and there is a modicum of organization in those pro-life groups that go about killing doctors, which I find kind of funny. If they're so pro-life, why are they killing people?
That's true.
It doesn't matter. It defies logic. It's politics.
Yeah.
It is politics. So basically the consensus of the group is sort of against my original theory, is that basically if anything is politically motivated and it's violent, it's terrorism.
But there's also the idea that if somebody is acting independently and say that they were affiliated with a terrorist group like ISIS or Boko Haram or something like that, I don't think that any terrorist group is going to disown these people if they produce the desired effect. Like, for example, the guy who shot up Ottawa and scared the heck out of Ottawa and forcing the Harper government to enact laws that were really strict, really hardcore, the kind of thing that would alienate ordinary people from being friendly with Canada.
Which the Liberals voted for and said they opposed, which is another story. But
that's a hot mess in and of itself.
We have to vote for it.
But the idea is that if an isolated incident produces a desired effect and that so-called lone wolf claims allegiance to this terrorist organization or that terrorist organization, I think it's highly unlikely that organization is going to disown them, because they'll say, hey, we didn't give this person weapons, we didn't give this person bombs or information, they acted on their own and they did some of our work. Awesome!
So you have freelance terrorism, exactly.
It's basically, and I agree with Jem here, it's basically what we're seeing is kind of like the franchising of terrorism in such a way that it's like almost like a McDonald's franchise in such a way.
But McDonald's has very strict limitations as to what you can and can't do.
You just have to copy it sort of in such a way. And I remember there was this book it was called like Jihad versus McWorld, and I was kind of reading it. But actually, what's really happened is Jihad and McWorld have come together into one more or less kind of way, in such a way like, let's just be a brand.
Except
and if you follow this ideology. Now, the one thing I would say, Jason, that you might be right on is that in the case of the Ottawa shooter, he had psychological problems.
Yeah, and he had no affiliation with anyone. He just basically did it. So
in that case, you might be right. He might not be a terrorist. That might just be a crazy person.
But therein lies another problem, which is that rather than address institutional problems that lead to terrorism, rather than address cultural problems that lead to terrorism, especially with white terrorism, you quite often have people who say, oh, it's not about terrorism, it's not about, the economy or this and that, this is about mental illness. But if you look at how places like the States treat the mentally ill, and the fact that they go on and talk about it and just, put a label on something, call it something that it isn't, so that they don't have to address the problem directly, that is hugely problematic.
Yeah, it's a hugely problematic thing. I mean, the thing is, I guess the fact is people try to make people scared, and that's the ultimate goal. I mean, the ultimate goal.
Call it terrorism.
Yeah, the ultimate.
It terrorizes.
Like the ultimate goal of, for example, go back to Brussels. It wasn't to kill 34 people. It was to make everybody else scared and bring in these crazy laws. Europe was always a very open place. I mean, bring in these laws.
ISIS wants to make Europe fascist.
Yeah,
in a way,
and then they have a reason to fight against it. That's basically their goal. Is they want to be.
And if that's the goal, ISIS is kind of winning.
But then people like
it's kind of scary.
People like Donald Trump are playing into their hands.
Yeah, totally.
Politicians are playing into their hands.
Well, in that sense, Hillary Clinton was correct when she said that some of the things that Donald Trump was saying were being used as propaganda in terrorist videos, because he was saying things about, he said a lot of inflammatory things like bar all Muslims from the U.S. There should be a Muslim registry and stuff like that. Yeah. Things that are reminiscent of fascist Germany, for example.
Meanwhile,
and then it turned out to be absolutely true.
Yeah. I'd say Trump's rhetoric is more closer to Mussolini, but some of his followers are closer to Hitler.
He did quote Mussolini too.
Some of his followers are closer to Hitler, though. I'd have to say.
Well, the hand salute is kind of a giveaway.
Scary times when people were willing to say stuff they would only think, and now they're willing to say it out in the open. In such a way that I've noticed that, like, we have these Trump supporters, people wouldn't say that before, like, what they're saying now. And I think the world is definitely getting more, like, extreme. We're going towards...
It's coming out of the closet, I guess.
Extreme. It may have been in the closet, but there wasn't a real, like, venue to to say it out loud in such a manner.
Yeah, I mean, well, the thing is, Trump encourages violence. He encourages violence against protesters at his rally. He has supporters who are
People of color, women,
but if
people with
he has supporters who are in the
disabilities.
KKK. He's saying it out loud, though. Before, the thing was like
Yeah.
to pass all these laws, do all these things which are horrible against minorities, whatever, but not say out loud, always couch it in some kind
Like,
of
example,
somewhat
like,
liberal
in
speak.
like a country like Slovakia or I was like either Slovakia or Slovenia, there's like a little Nazi party that dresses up in Nazi uniforms that have been elected.
Yeah.
Like they're actually elected.
That was also the case in Austria for a while.
Yeah, I mean, if you
it
look
was
at
the case in
Hungary,
Austria
it's completely-
a while ago too,
So I'm
and
saying-
we all know how that turned out. But
and we also see from the last French elections that the far right party is doing quite well.
well, they didn't do as well. But Marine Le Pen actually was in Quebec recently, which actually brings us to our Sergakis update.
They're all punks. They're all hippies. Va travailler, gagne ta vie, là. Est-ce que les gens-là, ils méritent les logements sociaux? Non. Puis est-ce que la ville, il devrait lui donner les logements sociaux? C'est non. If that table wants to smoke and they have to go outside, while they're doing that, they're going to have one drink less. So what happened is 3 punks / squeezies walking into the terrace. The first thing they did when they walked into the terrace, they start burping. But I never heard a burp like that. It was bigger than, the sound was bigger than the truck that goes by. And what?
Far-right French Front National leader Marine Le Pen came to Quebec last week for no apparent reason. All prominent politicians refused to meet with her. Protesters forced her to cancel her planned event, and she moved it to the Station de Sport in the village. The Station de Sport is owned by Peter Sergakis. Therefore, Peter Sergakis is still an asshole. That was the Sergakis report, and now we're going to lighten things up a bit. Lighten things up in the fact that this is something that maybe matters less in the grand scheme of things compared to other things going on. But those of you who have Netflix and live in Canada know that your VPN, virtual private network, which allows you to access American content or Netflix content anywhere in the world, no longer works. This was basically Netflix pretty much responding to fears of copyright holders in different countries when they expanded around the world. Now, the way this actually works is that the VPN still functions. If you turn it on, you put on US, you still get the US Netflix catalog. But the moment you try to play anything, American content that's available even in Canada, it doesn't play. It says you're detecting a VPN. The only content that plays is actual Netflix universal content like House of Cards, or what I ended up watching to test this theory, which was Fuller House. I only watched for an episode that maybe 2.5 episodes. I got
My
to the
sympathies.
yeah, but I mean, I was really wondering if how DJ and Kimmy Gibbler and Stephanie were going to do with the club while Uncle Joey was
Bob
home
Saget
babysitting her. Bob Saget was in the first one, but I mean, this brings up an interesting point. I mean, the reason Netflix is doing this is because of pressure, because of international pressure. Now, if Netflix was at the point where they have some really good original shows, House of Cards, to name Daredevil, Jessica Jones, which I like very much.
Orange is the New Black.
Orange is the New Black. If they actually got to the point where their own shows were worth the price of subscription alone, this wouldn't be an issue. But it's not the case. They rely heavily on the back catalog. And a lot of the back catalog that I loved on Netflix, I like my Star Trek. I like to watch like old Star Trek reruns. They had all the Star Trek series. The original series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, even the animated series. That was an American Netflix. Enterprise. And they had the West Wing. But then Canadian Netflix doesn't have that.
No. Canadian Netflix doesn't have anything.
They have very little.
The American one.
They have good
I
movies.
will say that they're clever in that they sandwich really good stuff in tons of crap.
Yeah. I mean, I like the Trailer Park Boys.
Yeah.
And that's Canadian content.
And for movies, Canadian Netflix is good. But it's kind of like if Netflix is a network, it's kind of like their prime time is their original shows, and everything else is just a bunch of affiliates with different programs.
Are they bowing just to because of property? This is about property rights, right? You can't we have a copyright, intellectual property right. So it's not really about we want to make more. We want more Canadian content.
No, it's because basically Netflix.
See, that's what bothers me. It should be more about we want more Canadian content. The CRTC is willing to help with that.
Yeah, Netflix has the shows. No, it's not about Canadian content at all. It's the fact that Netflix has the rights to their own shows all around the world, and they buy rights to certain shows in different markets. They're basically following the cable TV standard TV package. And this is what bugs me about this setup intellectually. I mean, In the world of where you have to broadcast something and you need people to rebroadcast it, it makes perfect sense that you have different people owning the local rights to things. But the internet should be one broadcaster. It should be one company broadcasting to the world. And Canadian companies, for example, there's Show Me, there's Crave TV. Show Me actually has a lot of the content that Netflix used to have. Plus, they have some stuff from Amazon. So they have some different stuff. Now, if you have like Netflix and Amazon competing against each other, that's fine. But why not focus instead on creating original programming and then selling that to the world and having the exclusive rights to that in the world? Why focus?
That I've been asking that for years about Canadian content. Like, why aren't we making our own shows and selling it to the world? Like, why aren't we putting more money in that? What does the CRTC do exactly?
Well, the CRTC is a regulatory body, but it's mainly it's right now being used to protect the giant media companies.
Because that's what I feel they do. They just protect the giant media companies. They're not producing any. They're not making Canadian content. They're not helping Canadian content at all.
The issue is that if you look at the Canadian film industry, the reason why it's nowhere near as strong as the Americans is from the beginning, they didn't focus enough on distribution. And because of that, while they are producing quality material, if you look, there are tons of amazing films that come out of Quebec every year. But because they didn't put enough emphasis and put enough money into distribution, they can't get their stuff out there.
Right.
Yeah, but
I mean that's changing because now we have.
If you had a service like Show Me, for example, or Crave TV, that basically focused, they bought all the rights to all the Quebec stuff or all the Canadian stuff, and then they maybe got the rights to some British shows and even some American shows. Because if Netflix had to get worldwide rights to everything, they wouldn't have the huge catalog they have. They would have maybe 3/4 of it or something like that, and then it would be like choosing through the channels. But instead of like the concept of local distributors for worldwide internet content just makes no sense to me and bugs me on a fundamental level. Plus,
no, because it can be accessed from anywhere.
Exactly. If there's no physical reason, no technological reason why I can't access a server in Australia as quickly as I can access a server in Toronto.
Absolutely.
It's just an imposition on it. It's just yes, I'm kind of annoyed I don't have my comfort shows. I like to watch Star Trek Deep Space Nine. It plays to the next episode, and I know I could buy a DVD or download it or something, but that's not going to go to the next episode and then stop if I'm falling asleep. Canadian Netflix they have good movies, they have good stuff, but
I have lost all faith in the CRTC, and I lost faith in it like years ago.
You're not the only one.
It's just they protect certain companies that produce Canadian content and allow those companies to basically milk these really bad, I don't know, I just feel there could be so many good movies and so much good music, so much good stuff coming out of Canada.
So many good TV shows.
There's no reason why we're stuck in last year here or first
one
year.
Of the things that upsets me about Canadian Netflix is that there's a lot of really good Canadian content that's being left out of Netflix in favor of crap.
Yeah, it just push CRTC. Why don't you push to allow more? That's what they should be pushing for.
Or push for Show Me to have that, or Crave TV to have that.
That's what they should be focused on.
There are a lot of excellent Quebec TV shows that I don't see on Netflix that really should be there. Like, for example, Les Bougons, which was a Quebec-made television show about a welfare family. Brilliant social commentary about Quebec and the welfare system, and, of course, Canada at large. That's something that could be a gold mine on Netflix if they just put it up with subtitles or even a dub. I say that with a lot of wincing.
Let's assume it's Canadian, right? Let's assume let's assume Netflix focuses on American stuff, something like Show Me. Because I looked at their catalog too. And you know what they could put on there? They could put on the Beachcombers, have the worldwide rights to the Beachcombers. You don't think hipsters in Portland are going to subscribe to this just so they can watch reruns of the Beachcombers? Believe me, this is something that, or Friendly Giant or any of the classic Canadian shows.
They need to look up, way up.
Yeah.
Short-sighted.
Exactly.
Just getting paid by these big corporations to do their bidding, because that's what the CRTC does.
And you know who else You know who else is beholden to big corporations? Apparently, I found out McGill University. And at McGill, this happened recently.
How will you create change? I'll tell you how. I'm William Shatner, and I'm a graduate of McGill University. And I'll tell you how to create change by giving money. Contributions to McGill University will go a long way in creating change in people's life. McGill changed my life.
William Shatner, plug-in for McGill, his own alma mater, has a building named after him, though not officially. Now, Jam, you are the editor of the McGill Daily.
like them. Yes.
You are a McGill student. I believe you're graduating.
I am graduating, yeah.
Tell us a bit about what's been going on at McGill for the past little while.
So that clip was William Shatner asking the alumni to donate money to McGill because McGill recently had this campaign called McGill 24, asking for alumni to give more money that they have paid with their tuition so that McGill can do whatever they want to do. But, of course, on campus, there were some activists who were against that, and one of those activist groups was a group called Divest McGill, who for the past 3 years has been petitioning the McGill's Board of Governors to have McGill divest its investments from in fossil fuel industries. Now, as I said, this has been going on for 3 years, and these Divest people, they're really dedicated activists. They have been doing their research. They actually gave the Board of Governors this research report, 100 pages, hundreds of pages long, probably around 100 pages. And so they have the science, they have the facts, they have everything behind them. And basically, what they're trying to appeal to is this board committee called the Committee to Advise on Matters of Social Responsibility. Now, they recently, as in last year, added some little tidbit there, saying that McGill can only invest in things that, in companies whose actions do not constitute grave social injury. Okay. Now, I'm going to assume that we all agree that fossil fuel extraction constitutes grave social injury. Yeah. Because, it hurts the environment. It just goes against everything that indigenous peoples have been fighting against and stuff like that. And last week, this Committee to Advise on Matters of so-called Social Responsibility released a report saying that while fossil fuel extraction constitutes social injury, it doesn't constitute grave social injury. Therefore, McGill decided not to divest from its fossil fuel industry, its investments in fossil fuel industries, and that just doesn't make any sense. They were basically what the report implies is that while the McGill Board of Governors recognizes that extracting fossil fuels is wrecking our planet, we're not at the point of no return, and therefore there's no need to do anything about it until we're all dead.
It's kind of like the judge saying Ghomeshi, he knows he's guilty, but he's going to acquit him anyways.
Yeah, and it's just it doesn't make it doesn't make sense for a research university to deny science.
Yeah,
and just decide not to divest from fossil fuels.
It's a classic PR. It's a classic PR move that's commonly used by industries like the chemical industry in the U.S., where they say that yes, there's harm caused by this, but it's not enough harm to cause significant damage to people right now.
Instead, what apparently that they're going to do is that they're going to create this separate sustainability fund, which people can donate into, so that if you want McGill to build sustainability stuff, you can donate your money there, implying that any other donation you might make to McGill will be used for unethical purposes. Yeah.
It's kind of like McGill alum Justin Trudeau with his whole energy, we were going to use the pipelines to actually make green energy or to create green jobs. So pipelines are the way to our green future, which we talked about in the last podcast. Yeah. I won't get too much into it, but as a McGill alum, I guess it's in perfect keeping with
It's just shameful. It's just shameful that McGill is just has... I mean, McGill never was just a bastion of progressive values or anything like that. But I
have a lot of progressive students I've noticed. It's responsible for CKUT, responsible for
the students are amazing people. They're doing anything that McGill does, anything that McGill claims to be progressive and belongs to it actually belongs to the student and not to the administration. But what's really annoying me is McGill in the past has divested from the tobacco industry. McGill was actually the first university in Canada to divest from South Africa. The South African apartheid, the companies that profit from South African apartheid. Now, McGill was around 10 years late in that, and it took them a really long while to be convinced to divest from the South African apartheid, but still, it's almost as if they always want to be on the wrong side of history.
But then people force them to the right side at the last minute. Yeah. Is that kind of the students force them to the right side at the last minute?
Students force them to the right side of right side of history. And then what happens? Oh, look, McGill did this. It wasn't McGill who did this. It was the students who forced them to do this.
Yeah, exactly. And the students at McGill, students at Concordia, students of people who aren't students, people who are just people out there, have plenty of things to do the next 2 weeks. So let's go to Hannah with the community calendar.
March 30th to April 1st, Midnight Kitchen presents Chomp, Food Politics Bite Back. This is the 7th annual Put Your Politics Where Your Mouth Is series. Some events include workshops on racism and food politics, and visibilized labor in activist communities, and an introduction to food politics. All the events are free or pay what you can. Thursday, 7 p.m., the Learning How to Scream project is welcoming its last guest speaker of the semester, Morgan M. Page. Morgan is a trans artist and writer and creator of One from the Vaults, the Trans History podcast. Join the Learning How to Scream project at 1500 Maisonneuve West, room 204. Friday at 11:30 marks the diploma return ceremony at McGill University. This event is for McGill alumni, students, professors to stage a protest to the McGill Board of Governors' decision to not divest from fossil fuel. Approximately 50 McGill alumni have already pledged to return their degrees.
All right, it's time for predictions.
Canadian women everywhere pool their money to hire 2 professional male doms to visit Ghomeshi's house with instructions that he's got a rape fantasy and no matter what he says, he's willing.
Some really radical action is going to take place at a certain university, and it's going to make them reverse all their wrong decisions.
Ted Cruz will come out with an amazing Ibanez guitar, jam out, win a rock session, and win a primary.
And Hillary Clinton is going to refuse that final New York debate with Bernie Sanders, and then she'll be attacked by a flock of birds.
The KKK lynched Ben Carson. Donald Trump claims it was about mental health.
A new Game of Thrones trailer will drop, and it will reveal a 3rd Targaryen.
Walt Disney will sue the Bernie Sanders campaign for having a perfect Disney moment in Portland.
John Kasich will win the Republican primary, become president of the United States, and then win a 2nd term and have his face etched on Mount Rushmore, and then he's going to wake up in a pool of his own vomit. All right, so thank you everyone for being part of the podcast. Sam, we can read you different on Forget the Box, but also for the culinary challenge.
Culinarychallenge.ca.
Jem, we can read. You'll be part of Forget the Box a lot more in a few weeks, but right now we read you on the McGill Daily.
Yes, you will.
And Jerry, we read you on Forget the Box, or we meet you at the bar.
Exactly.
All right, so thank you everybody. We'll catch you next time on the next FTB podcast. The FTB podcast by the Forget the Box Media Collective in Montreal was hosted by Jason C. McLean and produced by Hannah Besseau. For daily, unique, original content covering news, music, politics, arts, lifestyles, food, film, you name it, we've got it. Check out forgetthebox.net.